Welcome to the LudoKit Devlog. We are talking about version 0.0.55, which is what we were talking about in the last video or the next video, depending on what order you watch these things in and what order I upload them in. But anyway, the other video for version 55 was about credits fonts and coverage reporting. This one is about credits exports. So this essentially wraps the entirety of the credits management feature of LudoKit, at least in its intended first version that takes you through the whole cycle of, hey, you've got a game, you need credits for it, getting people into your credits, managing those credits, and then finally now exporting them, getting them out so that you can use them in your game. As noted here, this is LudoKit's in early access. It's not just available for public use, so this is kind of behind the scenes stuff. Although if you want to test it out because you're working on credits right now, if you hop into the Discord, you can let me know. And if I've got space in early access testing, I can put you in. But this is this is a working draft, so I'm showing you how it's working right now. By the time this is fully publicly available, there could be many details that are different, but it'll be the same idea. All right, so how does credits export work? If we're kind of flipping over this real quick, you can see I've got a bunch of credits in here with two different credits teams. So Butterscotch Shenanigans and then this one just called Development. So I got all these credits, and many are pending approval, and whatever. This is just a mixture of example things for testing with. Got a bunch of errors, but hey, I've decided I'm ready to export my credits regardless of not actually making sure they're all ready to ship. But yeah, I can still export it anyway. In this case, it's like, hey, I've detected a bunch of issues. I've got a contributor who won't actually be credited. And I've got a bunch of fonts that are not resolved because I have text that can't use the font that I've configured. But I can decide, hey, I'm going to export this stuff anyway. I've already done that, so we can flip over to look at what those exports look like. So if we do that, what do we see? There we go. All right, so if we flip over to the export, you basically get a zip file that has a whole bunch of JSON files on it. So one JSON file per target language of your game, because that's part of what LudoKit is doing for you is helping you manage all of the localized versions of your credits for your game. And so you get one file per language. It's a JSON file that also has a JSON schema. If this is something that you're not familiar with, the JSON schema is a standard that basically it's documentation that describes the structure of some other JSON document. So LudoKit hosts this, which means that if you open up one of these JSON files in a modern code editor that has JSON schema support, pretty much any modern one will, then it will just go download that for you and then use the schema so that you can then hover over things and be like, what is this? And it's like, oh, this is the LudoKit ID for this pre-roll type, and so on, right? So it also means that if you break something, it can tell that you've broken it. So if I were to change this ID to something else, then it says, hey, that doesn't look right because that's not an existing ID in LudoKit. So anyway, the benefit of that is that you can tell if you've broken something, or at least broken it fundamentally. And most importantly, you have to do something with this data structure, with all the data that's in here, to be able to actually render it in your game, right? And so to do that, you need to be able to tell what is in here and figure out the structure and all of that. And the easiest way to do it is just to open it up and look at it, but then having this extra layer of support where you can then hover over stuff to see what the thing is makes it a lot easier for you to figure out, okay, here's what the data is. How do I now process this so that I can render it in game somehow? So that's the idea of the schema part, and then the rest is just the details of your credits. And so the credits are broken into a few sections. You've got the current language that we're dealing with. So again, this is the language of the game. This is the target language of the game that these credits will be rendered in. So if the game is currently in English, then this is the English credits, if that makes sense. So we've got three sections. We've got your pre-roll stuff. So this is things like a game by in the name of a studio, or published by in the name of some publisher, or whatever. Those kinds of pre-roll, pre-credit roll things that are frequently displayed. So depending on your configuration setup for your credits teams in the credits manager, then that's what dictates what shows up here, and if any given team does show up here at all, and if it and what pre-roll text it shows up with. And again, the idea of doing this in LudoKit is LudoKit can have this stuff pre-localized for you because it's just choosing from a predefined set. And if you've configured all of your font stuff, then LudoKit also knows what font you need to use to render it based on your font configuration. And so essentially, this whole file is just this kind of thing over and over again, which is giving you some kind of thing and then telling you what the text is that you need to render, and then giving you the font that you can use to render. And we'll talk about fonts a little bit more in a second. So that's it, and you just basically work your way through here. So you got your pre-roll stuff, and then you got your actual credits. So this is basically organized by discipline. So in this case, like production or art or whatever. So you can use this as a heading. So basically, you would render production using this font, and then you would work through all of the roles within that discipline. So now here is what do we got here? The roles game design. So now here's a list of entries of people who are supposedly doing game design. So then as you're working your way through here, you'd be like, okay, I'm going to render this heading. Underneath that, render this heading, or depending on how you want to render your credits, you could basically work through all these contributor names, and then next to each one, slap game design again, right? The idea here is that LudoKit provides stuff for you in an order that is useful with all the details that you need to render stuff successfully, but doesn't really have strong opinions about exactly what you decide to do for how you render it. And since it includes what kind of thing each thing is, which kind of helps you orient yourself, and also the identifier for each kind of thing, or for each specific thing, and those are stable identifiers, then that also means you can do whatever kind of post-processing you need. If you need to convert this into some other kind of file format, if you want to strip out certain things, if you want to change the order of stuff, if you want to change the stuff as grouped, whatever, the sky's the limit. You do whatever you want. The core thing that LudoKit is trying to do for you is to give you data that you can do that with easily. So that's your credits, and then you got your affiliations. And so the idea here is that what your credits are for is to say who did what. It's not to say who is a part of what team. So your pre-rolls to say what teams were responsible for this thing coming into being. Your credits are about the people and what they did, and then your affiliations is basically saying, okay, now who's a part of those teams, right? So in this case, I'm saying, oh, hey, here's a team called Butterscotch Shenanigans that has one member, which is me. Again, this is test data, so I'm missing a whole bunch of it. You'll notice that when we were looking at the credits page, or the credits feature in LudoKit, that there's a lot more names in here than we're seeing in those affiliations, right? There's only one affiliation listed. Oh, and hey, it's right there. It's because this affiliation is hidden, and this is because of this concept in LudoKit credits, where I can choose my pre-roll displays. That's a whole game by thing we saw a moment ago. Right now, this is not showing up. And there's also the post-credits affiliation, which again, here is listed as none, which means that this team just doesn't show up in that section. And that's why it looks the way that it does. While we're back over here in LudoKit, I'll make a note of the font part of this, where you can see there's this checkbox up here that says include subsetted fonts. So the idea here is that, again, like I said at the beginning, part of what makes credits management painful is the font problem, which is that unlike other parts of the game, that if the game is in Chinese, for the rest of your game, you can probably just load your Chinese fonts and that's it, because all of your text is probably in Chinese all at the same time. But on your credits page, that's not true, because you'll have people's names and company names that are not in Chinese and could be in any language. And so now all of a sudden you need to load a whole bunch of fonts all at the same time to cover all the different glyphs that are being used to render everything in your credits at once. And this means we've had trouble with this in the past with our games, where we would then be on the credits page and we'd have to load, the entirety of the simplified Chinese font that we were using just to render 2 translator names, right? So we have to render like 6 glyphs, but to do it, we're loading, a 20 megabyte font file into memory. And when you're dealing with memory strapped devices, that can be a big problem. And so we, in our games, subset our fonts for our credits page. The idea of a subsetted font is it takes your existing font file and creates a new file, a new font file, that just only has the glyphs in it that you actually need. So if you are configuring fonts and then choose this option, then your exported credits also will include subsetted font files. And the idea is that because LudoKit knows, because of your configuration, and because it knows what language all the things are in, then it knows what fonts you needed to use for each element of text in your credits, which means it also can keep track of every single glyph that font is going to be used to render across all of your credits, which means that, hey, it can make a subsetted font for you that only has only and exactly the glyphs that you will need from that font in order to render your credits. So if you opt into doing that, then that will also give you, in your export, the subsetted font files. And so when you check that box, what you'll see in your JSON files when you're looking at a font is you'll see the font name with this dash credits. And you can see that exactly matches the font names that were provided for you when you got these exported credits or the font subsets. And so for reference, each one of these is like 10 kilobytes or something as a subsetted font, but this Korean one was like 7 megabytes before that. If you don't choose that option of creating subsetted fonts, then you won't have these fonts in here, and the names won't have the credits bit, because now the name will match your regular download from LudoKit from your font library. So what that lets you do is you basically get to decide, am I dealing with subsetted fonts or not? And if I'm not, I can just use the font names I'm already using. This will already refer to the fonts that I'm just using in my game in general. But if I do want subsetted fonts, then your export is updated to have these properly reference the names of your subsetted fonts. So that's the gist of credit exports, at least as they currently stand. Definitely interested in feedback about these. The idea right now, especially before LudoKit is even released, and then even in the earlier post-release days of LudoKit, the initial goal is to provide you with something that solves all of these really thorny, extremely tedious and annoying problems for you, but doesn't solve necessarily the stuff of like, okay, now that's all done and dealt with, and I've got my credits, I've got all the data, I know what fonts I need, I have those fonts, all that kind of stuff. But you still got to render it in your game somehow, or on a website, or wherever you're going to put it. LudoKit currently doesn't aim to try to solve any of that for you. It basically just gives you what you need to make that bit be as easy as possible, since the way that most people want to deal with the actual final rendering of credits is going to be extremely specific to their game engine, and so on. But in the longer term, ideally, LudoKit would also provide some basically pre-baked ways of rendering the exported credits, either probably by game engine, so that you would have a game maker way to do it, you would have a Unity way to do it, and a Godot way to do it that we would just have built for you, that you could basically use those, or again, just do your own bespoke thing, because ultimately it's just a simple data structure that you just iterate through to render stuff however you want. So that's the idea. If you've got any thoughts or feedback about all of that stuff, then you can hop over to the LudoKit Discord and let me know. And if you are wanting to be an early access tester of this feature or other aspects of LudoKit, while we're in this pre-alpha phase of the project, the Discord's also a great place to keep an eye on when things are opening up for new rounds of testing. And with that, happy game deving.